Hey guys, hope everyone's doing well as we continue to be locked down with this coronavirus thing. That's not going to stop us from learning, though. We're going to push on with World War II, and today we're going to start looking at the rise of the Allies. Now, before we get going with Rise of the Allies, though, I want to do a little bit of a review with what we had talked about previously with the rise of the dictators. And so as we look at this map of Europe from 1938 to 1940, you can see the purple there are the countries that are dictatorships. The pink are what are referred to as democracies that were dismantled by dictatorships. And the green are the sole remaining democracies of 1940. As you can see, there are not a whole lot of those that are still in effect in this portion of the world during this period of time. So question number one, what countries are still democratic in 1940? Well, as you can see on the map there, the predominant one, of course, would be Great Britain. Right next to Great Britain is Ireland. Then we also have Sweden, and we have Finland up here. Down here in the middle, we have Switzerland. Now, what's important to remember about Switzerland is this country remains neutral during World War II. So their involvement is very, very minimal, and as a result, they were pretty much just kind of left alone by everybody. So they remained a democracy throughout World War II. Question number two, which country was most responsible for taking over or dismantling democracies? Now, this is going to depend a little bit on what you already knew about World War II history, okay? So, Germany is going to annex Austria in what is known as the Anschluss, okay? Now, when Germany and Austria are annexed and they come together, they basically form one large country. So, Austria's democracy, out the window. Then Germany is going to invade a portion of Czechoslovakia known as the Sudetenland. When that happens and they notice that nothing's going to be done to them, then they end up taking over all of Czechoslovakia, and France and Great Britain pretty much just let them do it in what is known as an act of appeasement, meaning they figured it was better to let Hitler do what he wanted to do because he kept making them promises that this was it, this is the last thing I'm going to do, all right? And so they're like, well, let's just appease him, let's just let him do what he's going to do, and then he'll just stop. Of course, we know that he didn't. So as they take over Czechoslovakia, Germany dismantles that democracy. Of course, we know they push into France. They take over Belgium and the Netherlands. If you were in class with me early enough in the year, then you read The Boys Who Challenged Hitler, and you know what happens in Denmark. Of course, you can tell by the map here also that Denmark's democracy is dismantled by Germany, and the same thing is going to happen to Norway also. Then, of course, Germany is going to push into Poland, and that is going to be what finally triggers the European part of World War II, that on September 1st of 1939. Now, the dictatorships that we talked about on the previous video, again, Germany and Adolf Hitler. Down here we have Italy with Benito Mussolini. Over here we have Spain and General Francisco Franco. And over here, you don't get to see a ton of it, but this is the European portion of the Soviet Union. And of course, the dictator that we had there is Joseph Stalin. All right. Now, question number three then asks you, how do you think England felt about the spread of dictatorships? And I think it's probably pretty obvious. Great Britain wasn't real wild about this segment right here, which is kind of what I refer to as the triangle of dictatorships. Because Great Britain has nothing but dictatorships and dismantled democracies along her eastern coast. That's going to become a real problem later on when Germany starts to lob bombs over the English Channel in the London Blitz. All right, so Great Britain is not at all happy about what they see going on in 1940. All right, so that's going to lead us to this video segment and what we're going to call the rise of the Allies. And this is going to be part one, USA, USA. All right, so you can chant that along anytime you want to. Now, if you take out your notebook that you did the rise of the dictatorships on, you can just lay it open so you have two fresh new pages. I printed out and emailed to you this map. Now, this is only half of the map that we're going to use. This half is going to be the United States half. So, of course, you want this to be on the left-hand notebook sheet that is facing you. Later on, we will use this half. That will be in the other video series. That's when we talk about the rise of the Allies in Europe. And then I sent you a sheet of cutout pop-ups. You've got, well, here, let me make this video screen a little bit bigger. You've got good old FDR. You've got Ike, or Dwight Eisenhower. You've got General George Patton, and you've got General Douglas MacArthur. These are going to be the 4 allies that we're going to be talking about in this particular video. Okay, so you take your notebook, you glue your maps in there, and then we get things kicked off with President Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Many of you might not have known, by the way, that President Roosevelt was in a wheelchair, which he is depicted in here. That's because he did a really good job of making sure not a lot of people knew about it, because he did not want to portray himself as being weak either during the Great Depression and especially not during World War II. So Franklin Delano Roosevelt, this speech right here was what he gave the day after Pearl Harbor was attacked. And he said, December 7th, 1941, a date which shall live in infamy. The United States was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan. All right, that's one of the famous speeches Roosevelt gave, and it is the speech that he gave to Congress when he was asking them to declare war against the Empire of Japan following the attack on Pearl Harbor. Here's a picture of Roosevelt with Winston Churchill, who we will be talking about later in Rise of the Allies Part 2, Europe. But some of the things that Roosevelt did, first of all, he supported England through what was known as the Lend-Lease Act prior to entering World War II. The United States wanted to remain kind of isolated during World War II initially. They wanted to just kind of go back to a policy of keeping to ourselves. And so we were doing everything we possibly could to stay out of World War II, even though England continuously begged us to get involved because they knew things were starting to get bad. In fact, like I said, then the London Blitz occurs. Things get really, really bad for England, and they start asking for our help. But everybody in the United States, outside of FDR and a few others, really wanted to stay out of the war. So FDR started the Lend-Lease Act, which was allowing us to lend or to lease war materials, weapons, things such as that to England. We also had some retired military veterans decide that they were going to go over there and fight on England's side, but they were not sent by the United States government. That would have been against the powers that the president has. The president cannot declare war, only Congress can do that. After Pearl Harbor, he supervised the transition of the United States to a wartime economy. All right, so we had vehicle plants that were now producing, instead of cars you'd see on the road, they're producing Jeeps, or they're producing bigger transport trucks, or possibly producing parts for tanks. We start to see airline manufacturers stop making regular airplanes for personal and private use, and we start using them as military production plants. We see other plants that used to maybe make refrigerators or stoves or things like that. They start to make bullets, they start to make bombs. And that's all under Roosevelt's leadership during this wartime economy transition. So that's a big deal also. And then the final thing that we can put in our notes there is he was active in planning the Allied war strategy against both Germany and Japan. So when you put that in your little note section, you'll write all that stuff down, and I'll give you another chance to look at that here in just a second. This is a fairly famous photo right here. Again, we see FDR in the middle. He is flanked on his right, your left, by Winston Churchill. And on the right, that is, of course, Joseph Stalin, who ends up leaving the dictatorship side, at least as far as being the bad guys. He continues to be a dictator, but he jumps out of our Rise of the Dictators video and slides over into this one as he and the Soviet Union become part of the Allies that are fighting against Germany. So that is Joseph Stalin there on FDR's left, or on your right. Okay? So again, under Roosevelt, supported England through the Lend-Lease Act prior to entering World War II. After Pearl Harbor, he supervised the transition to a wartime economy, and he was active in planning the Allied war strategy against Germany and Japan. Now again, remember, if you need to stop the video, just go ahead and pause as you copy down your notes, and then when you're ready, just go ahead and hit play again, and you can join right back in where we left off. All right? Moving on to number 2, General Dwight David Eisenhower, also frequently known as Ike. General Eisenhower was quoted as saying, "The eyes of the world are upon you. The hopes and prayers of liberty-loving people everywhere march with you." And that was in a speech he delivered to the troops on D-Day, June 6, 1944. Eisenhower was known as being a successful general, and he led successful invasions in North Africa and Italy. He ended up being named the supreme commander of all Allied forces in Europe, so he was in charge of not just the United States Army, he was also in charge of the movement of the British Army, and in charge of the movement of what French there were, and in charge of the movement of pretty much every Allied country, their placements, their operations, and things such as that. Now, he didn't handle all the day-to-day minor stuff, but he did handle a lot of the placement of the troops, help put together the invasion strategies and things such as that. So he played a massive role as the supreme Allied commander in Europe. And then he also planned and led the Allied invasion of France on Operation Overlord, which most of you probably know simply as D-Day. Okay? And here again is a picture of Eisenhower directly addressing troops out on the front after a battle. He was known for being somebody who liked to meet with the troops, not on the same level as a couple of the other guys that we're going to talk about later, but he was pretty well liked by most people. I will tell you, however, that my grandfather, who fought in World War II and who fought at Normandy, did not like the guy. Didn't like him at all. I'm not entirely sure why. He died before I ever got a chance to meet him. But I did find out from my mother that my grandfather did not talk very kindly of Eisenhower. Again, I'm not entirely sure why. But generally speaking, Eisenhower was pretty well liked by most troops. Okay. Here we have a big photo op for a bunch of different famous generals in the war. I'm going to highlight 3 of them for you. The first one here is General Patton, who we're going to be talking about here in just a couple of minutes. He is a big guy as far as Europe goes. Over here we have General Omar Bradley, who is the second in command to this guy right in the middle, who is General Dwight David Eisenhower. Okay, and here again is another meeting of various generals. Omar Bradley again is right to the very far left there. Let's see if I can, yep, right here. This is Bradley again. Here's Eisenhower right here. Okay, this is a guy by the name of Bernard Montgomery, who we will talk about in the Rise of the Allies European version in the next video. Okay, so Dwight Eisenhower, quoted as saying, "I hate war as only a soldier who has lived it can, only as one who has seen its brutality, its futility, and its stupidity." Now, he said that, of course, after World War II. Eisenhower, of course, as many of you probably know, goes on to become President of the United States. And what you might not know is that the interstate system that runs throughout the United States is actually named after Dwight Eisenhower. So, some notes for you again. He led the invasions in North Africa and Italy. He was named the Supreme Commander of all Allied forces in Europe, and he planned and led the Allied invasion of France, also known as Operation Overlord or D-Day. That's going to bring us to General George S. Patton. Patton is known as a very tough guy. A lot of his speeches were laced with vulgar language, so I can't give you a whole bunch of the speeches that he delivered, but I can give you this quote, and it pretty well sums up the attitude of General George Patton. "May God have mercy on my enemies, because I won't." There's George Patton. Again, you see him. He has a 3-star insignia on his helmet, meaning he's a 3-star general in this photo. He led Operation Torch and the invasion of North Africa. He also commanded the United States Third Army after the Normandy invasion. And he also was known as being a very inspirational speaker, as I said. And then he also inspired his tired troops to victories across France and into Nazi Germany. So that is General George Patton. This is a picture of Patton in a victory parade in Los Angeles in 1945 after he returned back to the United States. Okay. Patton was also quoted as saying, quote, "Battle is the most magnificent competition in which a human being can indulge. It brings out all that is best. It removes all that is base. All men are afraid in battle. The coward is the one who lets his fear overcome his sense of duty. Duty is the essence of manhood," end quote. And as you can see by the insignia on his helmet in that picture there, by this time he has been promoted to 4-star general. Okay? So, General George S. Patton led Operation Torch in North Africa. He commanded the United States Third Army after Normandy, and he also inspired his tired troops to victories across France and into Nazi Germany. That's going to lead us to our last of the Allied leaders that we're going to talk about in this particular video, and this is going to be a general by the name of Douglas MacArthur, famous for his pipe smoking. There you see Douglas MacArthur wading through the waters back onto the Philippine territory that he was previously forced to flee. And he was quoted as saying, "In war, there is no substitute for victory." Kind of an obvious quote, I would say. There's General MacArthur, and some information about him. He was the supreme commander of the United States forces in the Pacific. So he did not fight in the European theater. He instead fought in the Pacific theater against the Empire of Japan. He was forced to flee the Philippines after Japan attacked, as I mentioned just a couple of seconds ago. A lot of people do not realize that the Philippines were attacked the same day that Pearl Harbor was attacked, and then the Japanese continued to attack the Philippines after that, forcing MacArthur to flee, which he famously then stated, "I shall return." The picture I showed you before when he was waiting back on the shores is when he actually did return, or he was quoted as saying, "I have returned." All right. He led the United States forces through New Guinea and then back to the Philippines. And he was also the general who accepted and signed Japan's official surrender in September of 1945. So that is General Douglas MacArthur. Here's a picture of Douglas MacArthur. He's the one that's closest to you. That is FDR in the white shirt, the president at the time. And the guy standing up with the long pointer is the Admiral of the Navy at the time. That is Chester Nimitz. He's a pretty big guy in World War II also. All right. MacArthur was quoted as saying that the soldier above all others prays for peace, for it is the soldier who must suffer and bear the deepest wounds and scars of war. So, for General MacArthur, Supreme Commander of the United States forces in the Pacific, was forced to flee the Philippines after Japan attacked, but then led U.S. forces through New Guinea and back to the Philippines, where they reoccupied the territory and then accepted and signed Japan's surrender in September of 1945. So that is going to be how your map is going to end up looking after we have finished up this particular segment, Rise of the Allies, Part 1, USA, USA. Now, of course, we still have some European allies that we're going to be talking about in the next video. Again, when you are done with this, I'd like you to have somebody take a picture of it with their camera or something like that. Just attach it to an email and send it to me and let me know how things are going for you. If you have some specific questions or you're having some struggles on something, feel free to email me those also, and I will get the information to you just as quickly as I can. All right? So, in the meantime, I want you to work on this. If you don't have Rise of the Dictators done, go ahead and go back and check those videos out and get those maps done. And then I want you to do what we're all supposed to do. I want you to be smart, be safe, stay home, and wash those hands, all right? We'll talk to you later.